The clerk will read the order of the day.
General business notice number 2, standing the name of Kat McNamara, to move a motion concerning protecting Territorians from gambling harms.
I call the member for Nightcliff.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. I read the motion, don't I? Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Madam Speaker, I move that the NT Legislative Assembly calls on the government to acknowledge that gambling and pokies cause significant harm in our community, recognise that the financial and social costs to our economy and community from gambling and pokies far outweigh any benefits from the Community Benefit Fund, recognise that the current taxation on gambling profits is woefully inadequate, and calls on the CLP government to minimise harm from pokies by introducing pre-commitment systems to all venues with pokies, including casinos, reduce the load-up limit for pokies to $100, increase transparency on the gambling industry by reintroducing mandatory publishing of venue earnings and taxation, publish monthly venue-specific data in line with other jurisdictions, and release the publicly funded NT Gambling Prevalence and Wellbeing Survey report within a month of receipt. Increase revenue for the NT and make online gambling companies pay their fair share of tax by increasing the tax on gambling corporations using NT bookmaker betting exchange licences, and remove the cap on this tax. Also improve integrity and accountability to the public by banning all gifts from individuals or companies in the gambling industry to MLAs, their staff and other statutory decision makers. And now I speak on it.
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Thank you. Sorry, this is my second motion before the House.
Very good.
So, Madam Speaker, today I rise on a matter that affects families right across the Northern Territory, the unchecked proliferation of gambling and the devastating harm it causes our communities. Madam Speaker, let me be clear. Gambling is not just some harmless form of entertainment in the Territory. For too many of our constituents, it has become a source of financial ruin, family breakdown and mental health crisis. The numbers are staggering. Australians lose approximately $32 billion annually to gambling. That's over $1,555 per adult, making us the biggest gambling losers in the world. And the Northern Territory is no exception to this troubling trend. Why is this happening? Because pokies are designed to be addictive, pure and simple. They employ sophisticated psychological techniques to keep people playing. Flashing lights, the near misses, the illusion of control. These machines are carefully engineered to draw vulnerable people into cycles of harmful behaviour. Research from the Australian Gambling Research Centre shows that 87% of regular pokies gamblers are experiencing harm. Even more concerning, those experiencing high levels of harm typically spend longer at machines, a median of 2 hours per session, compared to just 45 minutes for those at low to no risk. In the Northern Territory, we have one of the highest concentrations of pokies per capita in Australia. And where are these machines located? Disproportionately in our most disadvantaged communities, extracting money from those who can least afford to lose it. Unlike Western Australia, which restricts pokies to a single casino, the Northern Territory allows these harmful machines to proliferate throughout our communities. Madam Speaker, on Monday night I held a community event in my electorate where we screened the Australian documentary called Kaching, Pokie Nation, and held a community discussion afterwards. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend this documentary. It is a brilliant but devastating look inside the pokie machine industry and the social impacts and the power it holds over our political system. There were people from the industry who spoke on it, and it was horrifying to hear them say so casually that the question is how fast or how slow you want to bleed the users. How every single aspect of the machines are designed to create addictions, and they deliberately target the most vulnerable. This is evident by the distribution of machines. In Australia, the poorest communities have the highest number of poker machines. As Reverend Tim Costello said in the documentary, it is a ruthless transfer of wealth from the poorest postcodes to the pockets of the gambling companies. The predatory nature of this industry is enough to make you sick. And at our event, we had a member of Gamblers Anonymous come and talk to the audience. It was such a generous thing to do, to put himself out there and speak about his experiences with us. I won't use his name here, but I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart for his openness and generosity. The governments all over generally point to the community benefit funds as justification for the gambling industry's social licence. But, Madam Speaker, the argument does not stack up. According to research by the Menzies School of Health Research, the total quantifiable social costs of gambling in the Northern Territory are between $165 million and $380 million. That was in 2018. That represents a cost per at-risk gambler of between $9,700 and $22,000. The central estimate was $190 million or $11,000 per at-risk gambler. And now we have the government's own figures confirming just how inadequate the Community Benefit Fund is. Now, a reminder, one of the main reasons for this fund's existence is to use the profits from gambling to try and help reduce harms and mitigate the negative effects in our community. The latest Community Benefit Fund annual report of 2023-24 shows $17 million was paid out in grants covering various community needs. But guess what? Most of it had nothing to do with gambling harm reduction. In fact, specific gambling amelioration grants totaled just $3.26 million, and gambling research grants were a mere $320,000, together representing less than 25% of the total fund expenditure. The majority went to community organisation grants completely unrelated to gambling harm reduction, which of course is great for community groups who are struggling for funding. Now, these community groups are fantastic for the NT and I agree should receive funding from the government. But this funding doesn't need to come from the gambling industry harms. The government could easily allocate this small amount of funding each year in their budget to ensure that communities thrive. All funding is a political choice. And we've seen this in the budget that they are happy to fork out for corporate welfare to build infrastructure for gas companies, but will tell us they don't have money for community grants. Now, this is the wicked thing about the gambling industry, that they are cynically using the needs of the community for their own gain by essentially bribing us to allow them to continue. They have done what they do best. They want us to get addicted to their measly funding to support our local clubs. These reports clearly demonstrate how the fund prioritises general community grants over addressing the devastating impacts of gambling addiction. When compared to the Menzies School of Health Research estimate of up to $380 million in annual social costs, the amelioration spending represents less than 1% of the estimated social cost. This is a severely inadequate response and highlight how the industry's contribution through the fund completely fails to offset the enormous social harm it generates. The research also found that 1.4% of our population, or almost 2,500 Territorians, were classified as problem gamblers. That was in 2018, with a further 3.6 at moderate risk and 9.4 at low risk. But the share of problem and risky gamblers in the NT is significantly higher than any other Australian state or territory. For every dollar that finds its way to community organisations through the fund, multiple dollars are lost in productivity, healthcare costs, family breakdown, housing instability, and in some tragic cases, crime and suicide. According to the Alliance for Gambling Reform, these losses translate to social harm on an industrial scale. The Community Benefit Fund Annual Report 2023-24 reveals that licensed club in the Territory contributed to about $5.6 million in community support, representing approximately 13% of their net gaming machine revenue. But here's the kicker, that actually represents a decrease from the previous year when contributions were 14% of revenue. More concerning is how uneven these contributions are across venues. While some clubs report contributions exceeding 30% of their revenue, others contribute as little as 1 to 5%. This inconsistency demonstrates the need for stronger standardised requirements to ensure the industry adequately offsets the harm it causes. The social and economic costs far outweigh the benefits. The Menzies research revealed that a total of 11,335 gamblers reported that they had experienced at least one form of harm as a result of their own gambling. But even more concerning, 14,521 people reported experiencing harm from someone else's gambling. Among the affected population, the financial harms had an incident rate of nearly 40 incidents per person per year, with relationships and family harms occurring 34 times per year, and emotional and psychological harm 23 times per year. Online betting is also exploding in our communities, with rates of regular betting rising by more than 50% among men aged 18 to 34 over the past 8 years. Many of these online gambling operations are licensed right here in the Northern Territory, yet their contribution to our economy is minimal compared to the profits they extract. I was happy to see an announcement in the budget yesterday, an increase on the cap on the tax paid by these online operators, which I will touch on more in a moment, but it's not enough. The current taxation arrangements for gambling companies operating the Territory are woefully inadequate. The Racing and Wagering Bill 2024 was a feeble attempt to regulate a multi-billion-dollar industry, but the previous Labor government once again folded to the gambling lobby by consulting only one harm minimisation group compared to 28 betting companies. While Territorians suffer, gambling corporations continue to profit handsomely from their misery, while contributing their fair share their fair share to our public purse. By better regulating and taxing this industry, we can reduce harm and grow our revenue base to fund initiatives that actually improve the health and wellbeing of Territorians. Madam Speaker, we cannot discuss gambling harm in the Northern Territory without acknowledging its devastating impact on Aboriginal communities. Independent Yinya Guya has repeatedly highlighted how Aboriginal communities are disproportionately affected by harmful policies imposed without proper consultation or respect for cultural authorities. In previous statements about wellbeing, the member for Mulka has pointed to the harm caused when Aboriginal people are exposed to gambling venues in urban centres away from their homelands. He has described how many Aboriginal people living on remote communities and homelands are able to manage their finances responsibly when not exposed to the predatory environments of, quote, binge drinking areas, poker machines and gambling venues that exist in towns. The Menzies School of Health Research found that for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population being between the ages of 30 and 65, living in a single-person household and being a smoker were all associated with higher rates of gambling harm. And people living in Alice Springs or regional towns were significantly more likely to experience gambling harm than those in other parts of the Territory. This speaks to the importance of strengthening, not weakening, our gambling regulations. It also highlights why Aboriginal leadership and consultation are essential in developing effective gambling policies. Yet, once again, the consultation process for gambling reforms has fallen woefully short of meaningful engagement with those most affected. When we talk about reducing gambling harm, we're talking about addressing a significant contributor to the disadvantage and distress experienced by many Aboriginal Territorians. If we're serious about closing the gap, we cannot ignore the role that predatory gambling practices play in perpetuating cycles of poverty and harm in Aboriginal communities. Madam Speaker, this motion puts forward practical, evidence-based measures to address these issues. First, I'm calling for the introduction of pre-commitment systems across all venues with pokies, including casinos. These systems would require gamblers to set binding limits on their losses before they begin to play. The 2018 Northern Territory Gambling Prevalence Study found that 11,333 gamblers reported experiencing at least one form of harm from their own gambling. Even more concerning is the 14,500 people who reported experiencing harm from someone else's gambling. Research from the Australian Gambling Research Centre strongly supports pre-commitment approaches. Their studies show that load-up limits, or the amount that can be loaded into a poker machine at one time, are particularly effective when set at the right level. Their research found that 58% of high-risk gamblers loaded up more than $50 compared to just 22% of low-risk gamblers. This is why my motion calls for reducing the load-up limit to $100, a prudent step in the right direction. As Dr. Nancy Greer from the Australian Gambling Research Centre points out, quote, given the purpose of load-up limits is to prompt a moment of reflection before someone chooses to continue gambling, making this decision after every 100 or 500 is probably too late, end quote. Tasmania is already implementing a pre-commitment system that will limit losses to $100 per day, $500 per month and $5,000 per year by 2025. The Northern Territory should follow suit. Second, we must increase transparency on the gambling industry. The Northern Territory is one of the only jurisdictions that does not regularly publish electronic gaming machine expenditure data. The previous practice of publishing venue earnings and taxation must be reinstated. Additionally, I'm calling for the monthly publication of venue-specific data, bringing the NT into line with other jurisdictions. The publicly funded NT Gambling Prevalence and Wellbeing Survey report should be released within a month of receipt. The public has a right to know this information. The need for transparency I've emphasised is clearly demonstrated in the current Community Benefit Fund reporting. The reports show that the fund collected nearly $16 million in revenue, but provides insufficient detail on how effectively these funds address gambling harm. While the report meticulously details hundreds of community organisation grants, it lacks the rigorous evaluation of whether the $3.26 million spent on amelioration services actually reduces gambling harm. This motion calls for greater transparency around not just venue earnings, but also the effectiveness of harm reduction measures funded through the levy. Third, we must ensure that gambling companies pay their fair share of tax. The current situation is absolutely outrageous. The NT is home to Australia's online wagering industry, which should ring alarm bells for anyone, which has an annual turnover of $50 billion. Yet our tax laws are designed to protect these enormous corporations and their obscene profits. We tax them at just 5% of their profits, but with a ridiculously low cap on the tax, which up until now was only $1.41 million in tax paid per company, no matter how much they make. And as we heard in the budget yesterday, this cap will be increased from 1 million revenue units to 2 million revenue units. This is a step in the right direction, and I was heartened to see it yesterday, but it is not nearly enough. This means that the cap now sits at $2.8 million. This is just a measly, tokenistic amount from an industry with a $50 billion turnover. It's chump change, and Territorians deserve so much more. I'm still pushing for a removal of this cap. The cap itself is the manifestation of the power of the gambling lobby on our two major parties. It's the government's way of saying to their donors, we'll tax you, don't worry, we won't do it seriously. Now let me be crystal clear about what this means. A gambling corporation can make billions in profit, but they will never pay more than $2.8 million in tax to the Northern Territory. It's corporate welfare, plain and simple. Let's put this in context. The NT government is facing record debt levels, currently reported to be heading towards $14 billion. We are struggling to fund basic services for Territorians, and yet we are giving these massive gambling corporations what amounts to a free ride. It was positive to see the tax changes announced in yesterday's budget. Yes, it will see some revenue, but it's still not enough, not by a long shot. I should also note here that the other change we saw in the budget, which was to standardise a minimum 50% tax rate for activities under internet gaming licences, is only for online casino-type games. It does not apply to the online wagering companies that are headquartered here. Now, why is this happening? Because the gambling industry has successfully lobbied both major parties for decades. Just looked at what happened to the Racing and Wagering Bill 2024. The former Labor government vowed to overhaul this sector, but despite the update to the bill, the tax rate and the cap remained virtually unchanged. And during the creation of this bill, the government at the time consulted just one harm reduction organisation compared to 28 gambling giants who stood to benefit from the watered-down legislation. When the Labor government drafted this bill, there was virtually no genuine community consultation. The Greens repeatedly called for rigorous open consultation with all relevant experts and the broader public, but those calls fell on deaf ears. Instead, Labor pushed ahead with a bill that primarily served the interests of the very industry it was supposed to be regulating. The bill was supposed to modernise our outdated gambling laws, but instead it preserved the absurdly low tax rates and caps that benefit corporations at the expense of Territorians. It was a missed opportunity of epic proportions, a chance to properly tax a $50 billion industry and use that revenue to fund services for Territorians while also implementing serious harm reduction measures. This is a scandal hiding in plain sight. Every other state in Australia has a higher gambling taxes than the NT. Victoria, for example, applies a 15% tax on net wagering revenue. And yet we will now, as of yesterday's budget, cap our tax at $2.8 million per company, no matter how much they make. This is an unconscionable giveaway to an industry that is causing massive harm to our communities. The Territory simply cannot afford to leave this revenue on the table whilst our hospitals, schools and essential services are chronically underfunded. We need to remove this cap immediately and significantly increase the tax rate to bring it in line with other jurisdictions. This would generate tens, possibly hundreds of millions in additional revenue that could be used to fund much-needed services, rather than padding the profits of gambling corporations. Finally, we must improve integrity and accountability by banning all gifts from the gambling industry to MLAs, their staff and other statutory decision makers. The need for this ban couldn't be clearer after the recent outrageous revelations that the chair of the NT Racing and Wagering Commission has been accepting gifts and hospitality from the very gambling companies they're supposed to be regulating. Just weeks ago, Alistair Shields admitted attending the Darwin Cup as a guest of bookmakers. How on earth can Territorians have confidence in our regulatory system when the regulators themselves are accepting perks from the industry? This is exactly why I've included the gift ban provision in this motion. When gambling regulators are enjoying corporate hospitality on the industry's dime, it completely undermines the public's trust in their independence. In the last 12 months, political donations from the gambling industry have flowed to Territory politicians. The public deserves confidence that decisions about gambling regulations are made in the public interest and not influenced by corporate largesse. Madam Speaker, I know that taking on the gambling industry requires political courage. Their lobbyists are well-funded and persistent. But I ask members across this chamber, who do we serve? The powerful gambling corporations or the Territorians who elected us to protect their interests? The Menzies research reveals deeply troubling connections between gambling harm and other social issues. For the non-Indigenous population, experiencing domestic or family violence was significantly associated with gambling harm, with those affected being 7 times more likely to experience gambling-related harm than those not affected by domestic violence. The research also found that people experiencing moderate or high levels of psychological distress had significantly higher incidence of gambling-related harm. The gambling industry has a history of ruthlessly fighting efforts to reduce harm. Is this surprising? Of course not. Their profits rely on high-risk, heavy spenders. Research shows that 5% of gamblers account for 77% of gambling spending. But these gambling companies seek out and target these vulnerable individuals, designing things specifically to get them addicted and take money from people that can least afford it. This explains why the gambling industry fights so hard against reforms, but we can look to our neighbours to the west to see a real-world example of life without the stranglehold of pokies. Western Australia proves that we can have thriving communities without pokies on every corner. Their strong regulatory approach has limited pokies to a single casino, yet residents still enjoy clubs, sport and social connection, demonstrating that clubs don't need pokies revenue to thrive. And that is a really important point to underscore. The impacts of those lives who've been devastated by gambling addiction ripple through our community. Parents who can't afford school uniforms because a partner gambled away the family budget, elderly Territorians who lost their retirement savings, and young people whose first experience with pokies has led to a destructive addiction. More of the Menzies research found that in the Northern Territory, 2,118 adults reported that the kids missed out on school or something else as a result of their impacts. Although the lack of data collection from children about the harms they have experienced as a result of gambling of others means we don't know the full scale of harms experienced by children. We had thousands of households where people ran out of money or rent or mortgage payments an average of 14 times a year due to gambling, and 1,678 households ran out of money for food on an average of 24 times a year. These are our neighbours, our friends, our family members. They deserve better than the status quo. Madam Speaker, we stand at a critical crossroads. The window for sensible reform is finally open across Australia, with both the federal government and other states taking action to address gambling harm. The Northern Territory must not be left behind. The Community Benefit Fund receives nearly $16 million in revenue, yet the allocation of these funds demonstrates misplaced priorities. Less than 20% was directed to gambling harm reduction and research. If we are serious about addressing the estimated $381 million in social costs, we must direct more of these funds towards evidence-based harm reduction. The vast majority of Australians support stronger regulation. 77% believe that there are too many opportunities for gambling nowadays, and 59% believe that gambling should be discouraged. Our constituents are watching to see whether we will protect their interests or cave to industry pressure. We have seen the significant support for reform and protection for Territorians from gambling harms from the community group No New Pokies in Bantua. Their surveys revealed 98% support for no new pokies anywhere in the Red Centre. This community pressure achieved success in 2023 with the cap on pokies lowered in response to the pressure. So the research from Menzies School of Health makes it clear that the current situation is untenable. The $381 million in social costs of gambling harm is having a devastating impact on Territory families. And they're not just statistics. They represent real Territory families dealing with financial hardships, relationship breakdown, and emotional distress. My motion represents sensible, evidence-based reform that would make a real difference in reducing these harms. This motion presents an opportunity for this Parliament to make meaningful action on an issue that affects thousands of Territorians. It offers practical steps that would reduce harm, increase transparency, improve public revenue, and strengthen the integrity in decision-making. As the grassroots campaign No New Pokies and Bantua has shown, Territorians care deeply about this issue and are taking action in their communities. Now it's time for us, their elected representatives, to do our part. By implementing these evidence-based reforms, we can reduce the devastation of gambling addiction in our communities while simultaneously improving the Territory's financial position. This is not about eliminating gambling entirely. It's about putting reasonable guardrails in place to protect our most vulnerable citizens from exploitation. I commend this motion to the House and urge all members to support these common sense reforms that will protect Territorians from gambling harm. Thank you.
Member for Gwadja.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member for Nightcliff for bringing the motion to the General Business Day, and certainly when it comes to talking about gambling and reform, it's always an important area to talk about and to take a considered approach. I do acknowledge the motion put forward by the member for Nightcliff. The opposition is supportive, but will be moving an amendment, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move the following amendment. Omit all words after significant harm in our community and insert recognise the financial and social costs to our community, to our economy and our community from gambling and pokies. Establish a select committee on gambling harms to inquire into and report on A, measures introduced in other jurisdictions, B, identify social and economic impacts of gambling, and C, develop a best practice gambling harm minimisation strategy for the Northern Territory. The committee will consist of 2 government, 2 opposition and 2 crossbench members. The committee is to report by the first sitting day 6 months after passing of this motion. Madam Speaker, we've put forward the motion to establish a select committee in recognition and acknowledgement of the motion put forward by the member for Nightcliff is important. The opposition feel it's important to have a holistic approach and comprehensive review into gambling. Yes, of course, we understand the significant concerns around pokie machines and electronic gaming machines, but also it's important to acknowledge and look at harm minimisation strategies, particularly in other online portals. So I think, Madam Speaker, when we do talk about this issue, certainly acknowledging that it does require reform in this space. Having been a Cabinet Minister previously and having had for a short period of time the racing, gaming and licensing portfolio, absolutely acknowledge that there is always work to be done in that space, and certainly the work has to be done in terms of contemporising legislation, because, Madam Speaker, the technology is constantly changing when it comes to electronic gaming machines. So certainly I think this is a good opportunity for a select committee to look at how harm minimisation practices can be looked at. We need to look at this as a health issue because of the addictive nature of some of these electronic gaming machines, Madam Speaker. Certainly when I had the portfolio, there was work to be undertaken around lowering the cap on electronic gaming machines. That had been a commitment of the former Labor government. We started introducing that cap when we were elected in 2016, 17, 18. Of course, during the COVID years, that was put on hold as we responded to the pandemic. When I became the minister, we then moved to lower that cap again, acknowledging though that in between that process and applications had been made around accessing electronic gaming machines that were available in the Territory. That process was undertaken with the tribunal. But again, Madam Speaker, it is important. You will note the statistics that there are quite a number of pokie machines or electronic gaming machines in the Northern Territory, higher than nearly any other jurisdiction per capita, Madam Speaker. But again, this cannot be done in isolation. We need to make sure that we have a response and a harm minimisation strategy to all areas when it comes to gambling. So certainly we absolutely acknowledge that. Madam Speaker, I've been very public and I've been on the record continuously, very recently in the Australian Financial Review. I absolutely believe that the best way to tackle gambling or reform in the Northern Territory is to actually look at having national gaming reform. And I actually think we need to do something very similar to John Howard when he did the gun reform, because we need national consistency when it comes to gambling approaches, so that whatever, or regardless of whatever jurisdiction you're travelling in, there is the same national framework in how we respond. We've heard, Madam Speaker, from parents who have to try and minimise the impacts and the relationship that gambling can play in young kids' lives in everyday life, when children are on their iPhone or their parents' phone and they're playing a game. I know some members of this assembly like a good game of, I think it's Candy Crush or something like that. But each level you go up to, it then starts to ask you to use a credit card to pay for the next level. And that is identified as the early stages of normalising a young person's relationship with gambling, which in turn can lead to problematic situations where people are exposed to that. It grows, their addictive behaviour continues, Madam Speaker, and we can certainly see that growing into the future. So again, yes, this is an important motion. Electronic gaming machines and pokie machines are certainly areas that we need to look at. We need to look at all of those other areas. Again, there's been a conversation sometime around measures. When we were in government, we were talking, and at that election that has just passed, we were absolutely talking about the need to look at limits on expenditure. You note in Tasmania, Madam Speaker, that they have in fact brought in $100 limits, and also that those establishments have moved to a cashless community or venue. So making, again, it difficult for people who are problem gamblers or have addictive behaviours. It's not a matter of just putting the hold button on the pokie machine. It's actually making it more difficult for them to get access to that. So certainly there's been a number of conversations around transitioning to cashless gaming machines in and around for a long time. Certainly this committee could also look at how we respond around gambling in our communities. I know many members in this assembly know that there are many good card games played around the Northern Territory, and there's a good bit of chuck-in that goes in there, and certainly someone's always a big winner at those card games, but some people are also big losers. And I think, again, that education piece around gambling and the effects that it has on our communities is incredibly important, Madam Speaker. That work is important. Again, there has been a commitment of lowering electronic gaming machines as they become available. There's been conversations nationally around snooze you lose policies, whereby if a machine is not active for a period of time, the government of the jurisdiction then makes moves to take that machine back because it's been dormant. And I think we've seen that particularly here in the Territory as well. A number of machines haven't been used for a period of time, but they're still held by the licensee. So it's a very complex space. Certainly no one's claiming here today to have all of the answers, but I certainly think that we can absolutely work at looking at whether it's a select committee or whether the government want to take some time to think about how they respond to this. But gambling does cause harm if it's done irresponsibly. You know, I note that there's campaigns about gambling responsibly and taking into account the effects that it can have. But we also need to be mindful, as I think the member for Nightcliff has spoken about, where electronic gaming machines pop up. Talking to people in and on the streets, sometimes it can become very difficult when they say, we want to go out for dinner, but there's actually nowhere where we can go for dinner where there's not a pokey machine. And the kids, of course, can hear ding, 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 or whoop, whoop, or whatever sound they make, and it draws their attention and it starts to normalise that behaviour. So I think we should look at it as a harm reduction and a health issue, a bit like we did with the Riley review. Like electronic gaming machines shouldn't be able to be seen from the restaurant areas of pubs and clubs or casinos, wherever there is places where people can go with their families. They should be completely partitioned off, and you should not be able to see the bright lights trying to lure people in or make it attractive for children. I think that's incredibly important. Of course, as the member for Nightcliff has spoken about, there is the Community Benefit Fund, which does fund a number of really wonderful community groups doing great work in our community. When we were in government last, used to work with and provide amelioration funding to groups like, whether it was an organisation like CDU or Amnesty, to look at doing that work. And it's important work, absolutely, but I guess sometimes there's only so many times you can conduct that research before you are fatigued. We really need to look at how we can respond. Yes, the Northern Territory government has, and the previous government did contemporise, and heaps of work has been undertaken around the wagering and betting work. But I think the best way is to have a group of members of the Assembly look into it, as the amendment reads. But also I think we do need to call for national uniform legislation when it comes to gambling, particularly whether it's the use of electronic gaming machines, online games and the addictive behaviours that they might bring, whether it's the, gambling advertisements. I think there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done nationally that could help. So I absolutely acknowledge what's been put forward. The opposition has put an amendment forward for consideration, and I will leave my remarks there, Madam Speaker.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise to talk to this motion as the Minister for Racing. And Madam Speaker, I'll just start on the outset by letting the opposition and the crossbench know that we won't be supporting either of the motions that have been put forward today, and I will go through my contribution to explain why not. Madam Speaker, gambling has long been part of life in the Northern Territory. For many Territorians, it's recreational, it's a night out, it's a trip to the track, it's a social flutter with mates. And in a free society, people deserve the right to choose how they enjoy their time. The CLP believes Territorians are capable of making their own decisions. Our job is not to tell people how to live, it's to make sure there is support there for those who need it and to ensure that industry is playing by the rules. The Territory has one of the toughest caps on gaming machines in the country, with 1,659 in total. And even then, not all of them are operational. From pubs and clubs to casinos and online platforms, the NT has a strong and modern codes of practice in place. These aren't static. They are updated to reflect regulatory best practice across Australia. And our approach is clear. Provide support to the vulnerable without punishing everyone else. We're under no illusions gambling can cause harm, and the Territory has one of the highest per capita gambling spends in the country. That means that we have a greater responsibility to get it right. That's why there's strengthened oversights through Licensing NT's dedicated gaming unit, and why both casinos have implemented facial recognition to enforce self-exclusion and their own banning procedures. The Territory also is part of the national working group reviewing new measures like cashless gaming and pre-commitment systems. But unlike the rest of Australia, the Territory has its own unique challenges. And that is why this government is focused on what works and not ideology. Madam Speaker, we also know that gambling revenue must benefit the community. And in the Territory, it absolutely does, and it has done so for years. The Community Benefit Fund, supported by a 10% levy on gaming machines, is a great example of that. In 2023-24 alone, the CBF delivered 275 minor grants worth over $2.8 million. 59 major community grants totalling $7.2 million, over $3.2 million in harm minimisation grants, 20 community event grants, two research projects, and funding for 16 ex-government vehicles to support not-for-profits. This isn't abstract policy. People often forget that this is the boots on the ground support for our local sports clubs, volunteer groups, and youth programs. It's about giving Territorians an improved lifestyle and opportunities to engage with community. But nothing is set and forget with our CLP government. In our first year of action, a review of the CBF Research Grant program is underway, with a new gambling research guideline due by July 2025. And this will better inform and determine what is needed for the Territory and drive meaningful outcomes and avoid replication of what is already being researched nationally. We are committed to transparency. That's why this government delivered a proper framework to regulate lobbyists for the first time. That includes a lobbying code of conduct and a public register of lobbyists, something that Labor never bothered to implement. We also support data-driven decision-making, not ideology. NT-gambling data is publicly available and contributes to the Australian gambling statistics. The latest Gambling Prevalence and Wellbeing Survey will be published once finalised, just like every previous survey has been. Because good policy does start with evidence, not assumptions, not slogans, and not hypocrisy. And Madam Speaker, I want to talk about hypocrisy. And I want to highlight that this motion that comes from the Greens member, the member for Nightcliff, who claims moral high ground on gambling harms, and yet the single biggest political donor to the Greens is Mr Duncan Turpie, who made a personal donation of $875,000, which is the top of the list of the Greens political donations webpage. The Greens are happy to preach about gambling harm, but they've taken the most from a professional gambler to fund their federal election campaign. Last month, we found out that Duncan Turpie, a reclusive gambler and long-time Greens donor, has been bankrolling billboards and social media ads in key Brisbane seats. The Australian newspaper says that while the Greens push for strict gambling ads bans, they claim there's a big difference between a gambler and a gambling company. Or, Madam Speaker, is it okay for them because Mr Turpie doesn't seem to dabble in the pokies? That's the topic of today. The donations were publicly disclosed but labelled as non-political, despite being used for electioneering. Just another case of the Greens saying one thing and doing another. Territorians deserve better than grandstanding from a party bankrolled by betting money. Like I said, good policy always starts with the good information, not the assumptions, and certainly not ideology. Madam Speaker, we must not forget the context that the CLP has inherited. When we came to government in August 2024, we unravelled a financial disaster, tucked away and within the books, and Labor left us with an eye-watering $12.3 billion in projected debt for the Territory within 3 years. There was unfunded services, funding cliffs at every page we turn. Expensive, flashy buildings with no money to operate them, and blown-out Labor pet projects all over the Territory. So yes, Madam Speaker, every dollar counts, including from gambling contributions. We recognise and support the wagering industry's strong contribution to the Northern Territory through local jobs, Territory-based offices, community sponsorships and funding. Their success has helped drive economic activity, and we acknowledge their ongoing commitment to operating here in the Territory. But we also recognise that success should not come at the expense of transparency or fairness. We are fixing the fundamentals, replacing Labor's ad hoc, opaque tax deals with clear, sustainable and consistent arrangements. This week, Madam Speaker, the Treasurer announced reforms to increase the industry's contribution, and soon there will be legislative amendments to the Gaming Control Act 1993, establishing a 50% tax rate on profits from lottery ticket reselling and matching activities under internet gaming agreements. This will standardise the taxation of internet gaming in the Territory and ensure a level playing field for online operators who offer ticket reselling or matched lottery products. We're also amending the Racing and Wagering Act 2024 to double the annual tax cap for bookmakers and betting exchanges from 1 million to 2 million of revenue units starting from the 1st of July 2025. The majority of Territory wagering licensees are not likely to be affected by the change to the cap. For the few likely to exceed it, the increase reflects turnover, which reached a combined $41.5 billion in 23-24. And these changes will deliver a fairer return for Territorians, contributing to safer streets, better health services and real economic growth. Madam Speaker, in recent weeks, there's been some commentary around my role as the Minister for Racing and the engagement that I have with industry stakeholders, including attendance like key events like the Darwin Cup Carnival. And I want to be clear that, of course, ministers have a responsibility to engage with portfolio stakeholders and the community, whether it's listening to industry operators, consulting with regulators, or turning up where the community is. It's how we make informed decisions. It's how we govern as ministers. That is our job, and that is what we were elected to do. It's not a perk. It's part of the job, and it's hard work. Well, we will continue to consult, to listen and to lead with integrity, because responsible engagement is how good policy is made. And Madam Speaker, as elected members, we are all required to declare any gifts, benefits or hospitality we receive, and that has been the case for a very long time. Madam Speaker, I understand that the member for Nightcliff is seeking to highlight the harm from gambling. And yes, we want this industry to be safe, transparent and well regulated. But gambling is not unique in that respect. Just like there are other industries, such as the alcohol industry, just like a water industry or a fishing industry or an agriculture industry, they all need to be run safely with good regulation to continue to operate. And government has a duty to engage with industry, whether the economy is growing, stagnating or struggling. And that's how we drive reform, that's how we attract investment and protect the community. Madam Speaker, gambling should be a choice, enjoyed safely with safeguards in place, not a burden, not a trap. We're taking a fair, measured and evidence-based approach when it comes to gambling, enabling responsible Territorians who like a flutter, ensuring industry contributions to the Territory's future and protecting vulnerable Territorians and ensuring help is available if needed. And we'll keep doing that without rushing into unproven reforms, without taking on ideology, nor the detriment of existing businesses and local jobs and those who contribute to our economy and our great lifestyle. This is about keeping gambling safe, enjoyable and fair, and making sure that help is there when people need it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak in support of the motion to reduce gambling harm in our community, and I thank the member for Nightcliff for bringing this motion to this Parliament today. We've heard a lot in this chamber about a will and intention to invest in prevention programs that will make our communities safer by dealing with the root causes. And we've heard a lot of what I hope is not just rhetoric about a territory where everyone can afford to not only meet their basic needs, but also to enjoy the so-called territory lifestyle. And Madam Speaker, the CLP government's first budget is a timely opportunity to highlight that for many Territorians, the cost of living causes immense financial stress. None of us want people who are already struggling with poverty to spend more than they can afford on a temporary escape from that stress of poverty that invariably worsens their financial situation. Gambling offers dangerous and addictive false hope, a $1 in a $1 million fish chance. None of us want someone to get into unimaginable debt or experience unmanageable debt, or experience financial stress when they can't afford to meet their basic needs. And this can happen even if a person has the best intentions, even if the person has a good income. For many people, and for many people struggling with gambling, that is exactly what happens. Regardless of our personal views on gambling as entertainment, the evidence is clear that for many in our community, gambling is far beyond entertainment. It's addictive, just like alcohol or drugs. And as with those addictions, gambling is often hidden behind a wall of stigma, shame, secrecy and deception. It's normalised and widely promoted. We see advertising for bets on everything from sports to award shows, even our own NT elections. Meanwhile, Australians lose more to gambling per capita than any other country in the world. Let's be clear, gambling companies make excessive products off the hard-earned income of Territorians, and these profits don't come back to the Northern Territory. Gambling companies are not local businesses, but large national or multinational corporations, and these companies are even more predatory in their operations here in the Northern Territory because we have the weakest laws in the country, enabling them to do things that they couldn't get away with in other states and territories. So the argument that gambling contributes economically to the Northern Territory is at best misleading. Most gambling profits are siphoned straight out of here. And if we're serious, I'll move on from that. Madam Speaker, the member for Nightcliff has done the research, thank you, and provided us the data supporting gambling reform. And I'd like to contribute to this debate by sharing a story, because at the end of the day, the laws we make in this chamber are not abstract, but they're laws about real people. I suspect that many members in this chamber have relatives, neighbours and friends affected by gambling-related harms. My family is no different. My partner's mother has kindly allowed me to share a bit of her story, and I thank her deeply for her bravery and her commitment to this. Although her story took place in another jurisdiction, it illustrates a common experience for many Australians. She and her husband ran small businesses for many years, struggled financially and were constantly in debt. When poker machines were brought into Victoria in 1992, she turned to this as a distraction from this stress and in the hope that a big win would somehow bail them out. Like many others, she borrowed to pay off debts and to continue gambling. She used credit cards, loans from friends and sold possessions. Eventually, it became unsustainable. The fallout was immense. Bankruptcy, the breakdown of a 29-year-old marriage, loss of friends, employment, loss of housing, loss of community support and serious health issues. Madam Speaker, in her own words, gambling for me is an addiction. How I acted during the 14 years I was gambling was not like me. I became fixated on poker machines, treating people differently than ever before, lying to feed my habit. From being a people pleaser to an addict did not take long. Almost nothing and nobody mattered. I just wanted to get my next fix. My husband left me, and this was yet another reason for me to visit the pokies. I started borrowing money from the organisation I worked for, telling myself I would repay it until realisation set in. I didn't even know how much I had borrowed, and I was on a downward spiral with no end in sight. I decided to commit suicide. I was hurting and I didn't have any other ideas. My eldest son and his partner were visiting and they said, "Let's meet for lunch." So that was me. And when we got there, we knew something was wrong. She'd wrapped up her last few heirlooms, her mother's wedding rings, and she gave them to us as a present. And we asked her what was going on. She said, "I need you to look after these for me." She then broke down and told us about her gambling. We talked it through, and she contacted her boss and then the police, and she was charged and began a long journey to rehabilitation. For her, the turning point came in 2006 when her middle child became pregnant and offered her a place in their home on the condition that she stopped gambling, and she's been free from gambling ever since, for 18 years. Good on you. Madam Speaker, my partner's mum is an amazing woman. She has spent her whole life caring for others. She's known to so many people as mum, and she nearly lost all of that through the addiction and harm done by gambling. In typical fashion, since 2018, she's been part of the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation's Lived Experience Advisory Group. She's participated in education programs, media campaigns, community outreach and policy development, bravely telling her story. Her work continues as part of her city's Gambling Harm Prevention Task Force. She continues to work towards gambling harm prevention. She said, "There are many stories like mine, and I am one of the lucky ones, but gamblers in Australia spend more than anyone in the world per capita. We've heard here about children playing on devices even before primary school age, and the rewards are designed to lead them towards betting." Madam Speaker, I tell this story to remind us that we're talking about real people here. I'm so grateful that my partner's mother was able to escape from the incredible harm that gambling did to her and to those around her. I greatly respect her strength in being 18 years free of gambling. I thank her again for being willing to let me share some of her story and for the work she now does to advise and contribute to programs to reduce gambling harm. I don't want anyone else to have to go through what she went through and what her family went through if there are things that we can do here in this chamber to reduce that harm. The measures in the member for Nightcliff's motion are moderate in comparison to what some evidence suggests. This motion asks us as community leaders in this chamber to acknowledge the harm of gambling and the economic, human and social costs. Supporting this motion, I know I also support the amendments put forward by the member for Gwadja, will send a strong signal of encouragement to those experiencing gambling-related harm to let them know that we see them, that they are not alone and that we're willing to do something to address this. Madam Speaker, I welcome the tax changes in the budget as a first step towards addressing gambling harm, although I notice this reform comes with a cap on the tax companies pay, letting the big players get away with paying the same tax as smaller players, but it's certainly a start. And let's continue this commitment now by implementing the rest of this motion. As you know, Madam Speaker, I advocate all the time in and out of this chamber for us to work together, to do politics differently, to set aside adversarial approaches and to work together for what's going to be best for our whole community. I commend and support this motion to the House, and I again urge everyone here to support it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
In closing, member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And sorry. Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I want to say thank you to the independent member for Johnston for supporting my motion in full. In regards to the amendment put forward by Labor, I understand that I'm at the mercy of this chamber, and I can and will continue to put things forward here that aim high, to the highest standards possible, because Territorians deserve it. But if my motions get watered down by the major two parties, then it's up to them to explain their actions to the community. So I am happy to support Labor's amendment, although the CLP have confirmed they won't be supporting that one either. I have to say I am utterly disappointed and disgusted, but not surprised by the government's rejection of my motion. I reached out to
What's your point of order, member for Gwadja?
Standing Order 20, Madam Speaker, the member for Nelson may be interjecting saying no one cares. I think that's offensive to the member for Nightcliff.
Look, it's not very kind, but I don't think it's on the offensive scale. I mean, I think we'll just let that go through to the keeper, but it's not very pleasant, but it's not on the offensive scale, I don't think. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I mean, it does show the contempt with which the member who said that no one cares holds for people who are struggling from gambling addiction, from the community, from all the evidence and all the experts, and it says
Okay,
a lot.
stop the interjections.
Deputy Chief Minister. Yeah. So I reached out to every member of the government to meet with me to discuss this motion and how we can work together to reduce the terrible impacts of gambling in our community. No one took up the offer to meet with me and work together. The hypocrisy we just heard from the Attorney-General is breathtaking and, frankly, completely hilarious. Firstly, the Attorney-General and Minister for Racing this afternoon claimed that they trust Territorians to make wise decisions when it comes to gambling and does not want to impede on the rights of responsible gamblers. But this is quite simply a ridiculous approach to a public health issue. For example, we do not say that we don't want the rights of safe drivers by punishing them by forcing them to wear a seatbelt. No, we legislate changes to ensure that all people are safe on our roads. And I also want to correct the record regarding the remarks made by the Minister for Racing regarding the donations to the Greens. They so desperately want to take the moral high ground, but of course they can't, because they are funded by gambling and alcohol companies, oil and gas companies and property developers. Yes, no, we are not. So I'm correcting the record. Listen up and you can hear the correction to the record. If you would stop interrupting and listen, you would hear the corrections to the record.
Okay, please take your seat, member for Nightcliff. What's your point of order, opposition leader?
Standing Order 20, interruption and interjection. I think the government is being very disrespectful to the member for Nightcliff.
Okay, so we'll have silence from now on so the member for Nightcliff can finish her comments.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So, yes, the Queensland Greens, not the NT Greens, received some donations from a professional gambler, but he is not associated with the gambling industry. He's a professional poker player and does not engage in the pokies. If you can't understand the difference between a gambler and a gambling company, then Lord help us all. They're trying to confuse... Yes, he is a poker player.
Silence, come on.
So, he can... Yes, I absolutely am defending it. It is hilarious that a party that is funded by all the things that cause harm in our community, they bankroll your party and you want to have... You're trying so hard. I appreciate that you're trying hard. But the reality is that this person is someone that has had a truly lucky break, I guess, and this person chooses to donate money to causes that he seems worthy, such as supporting a grassroots political party who fights for the rights of everyday people over big business. He is not a gambling company, and the fact that these people can't get it into their heads just shows how much they are listening.
Silence, please.
So,
Member for Nightcliff, talk to me.
Thank
Talk
you.
to me.
We could just turn that down. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for them. Now, the CLP campaigned on reducing crime and protecting Territorians, but when presented with evidence-based measures that would actually protect people from another type of harm, they've chosen to protect the gambling industry profits instead. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. This government talks endlessly about being tough on crime while refusing to address one of the key drivers of financial hardship, family breakdown, and yes, criminal behaviour in our communities. Let me be crystal clear about what just happened here today. The government has just voted against measures that would protect vulnerable Territorians from predatory gambling practices, provide greater transparency in an industry raking in billions, redirect funds from harmful practices to actually helping people, and strengthening integrity in decision-making around gambling. And for what? To keep the gambling industry happy? To protect those political donations flowing in? The Community Benefit Fund collected nearly $16 million in levy last year, and yet a pathetic 25% went to gambling harm reduction and research. And we have heard, as I've said in this chamber, that the social costs are estimated to be up to $381 million annually. Now, this government has just said that they're perfectly fine with that equation. I have many stories of the rippling effects that the predatory gambling industry has on our community, on marriages destroyed, children going hungry, young people developing terrible addictions, setting them up for failure in adulthood. When I share these stories with this government, do you know what I hear back? I hear empty talking points about gambling being part of the territory and freedom of choice. Well, let me tell you about freedom. These pokies are specifically designed to be addictive. They are programmed games to make you lose, and they are carefully engineered psychological tricks are not about freedom. They're about trapping vulnerable people in cycles of addiction. Western Australia has proven we can have thriving communities without pokies on every corner. Their strong regulatory approach has limited pokies to a single casino, and somehow, magically, their club, sport and social connections continue to thrive. Meanwhile, the Northern Territory has one of the highest concentrations of pokies per capita, disproportionately located in our most disadvantaged communities. And I just want to put on the record the continuous laughter and injections from that side that shows Territorians how much our government really cares about their suffering, which is not at all. We heard, as I said in my speech, about the thousands of Territory households where people ran out of money for rent or mortgages in a cost of living crisis. They ran out of these on an average 14 times a year due to gambling. Over 1,500 households, people ran out of money for food on an average of 24 times a year. Over 2,000 adults reported that their own kids missed out on something, and that is only the ones that are reported as a result of gambling. This government thinks this is all perfectly acceptable. It's not too late to change course. It is a bit late today. I'm guessing if they're going to vote against it, they can't find their spine, they can't find the moral fortitude to do something. But it's not too late because the government could still implement these sensible evidence-based reforms. The pre-commitment systems, the transparency measures, the proper taxation of gambling companies, all of these could be introduced tomorrow if the political will existed. But the government has shown today that it doesn't have that will. It has shown that corporate interests trump the welfare of everyday Territorians. It has shown that it would rather let gambling corporations continue to extract wealth from our most vulnerable communities and stand up and say, enough is enough. They now have to look their own constituents in the eye and try to explain to them why they blatantly chose to protect gambling companies over the well-being of their own constituents. I want to assure my community and all Territorians that as part of the NT Greens, we won't accept corporate donations such as donations from the gambling industry, such as the ones that the major parties do accept. I can assure you that I will always work in the best interests of everyday people, always. I will continue to advocate for these reforms because I know they will make a real difference to the lives of Territorians, and I urge members of the government to reflect deeply on their decision today and ask themselves, who are you really serving? The powerful gambling corporations or the Territorians who elected you to protect their interests? Thank you.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. I think the noes have it. The question is that the original motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no.
Division.
I think the noes have it. Division, it's supported. A division is called. Is 21 noes and 3 ayes. The noes have it. The clerk will read the order of the day.
General business notice number 3, standing in the name of J. Davis, to move a motion concerning a select committee on the Indigenous Employment Provisional Sum.
Member for Johnston.